The 1960s were fascinating times for DC Comics. In the first half of the decade, they simply dominated the comic book market, with even one year having 9 out of the top 10 sellers. They published many comic books, dominated by superheroes including Superman, Batman, and the newly remade heroes from the Golden Age like The Flash and Green Lantern. They also published many other titles from different genres, including Western, war, science fiction, and even romance. Who were some of the greatest cover artists for DC in the 1960s? Let's take a look and talk about who these artists were. Let's start with some honorable mentions before going into the top 10. Steve Ditko only had a short stint at DC, but one title in particular is notable for its covers, and that's The Creeper. I always thought the covers for this run were quite amazing. Gene Colan is also in the same category. He did a few romance covers, and they're quite interesting, but didn't do enough covers for DC in the 1960s before moving to Marvel and doing some excellent work there. There are a group of artists I feel did covers that are very similar in terms of style, and they did many covers, and while the covers were fine, they didn't particularly stand out for me. These artists include Murphy Anderson, Bob Brown, Dick Dillin, Sheldon Moldoff, and Mike Sekowsky. Some of these artists I mentioned are pretty heavy hitters in terms of their work. It just goes to show you the depth of artists DC had during this time. They would routinely publish over 30 titles a month in the 1960s, far more than Marvel. Okay, on to the top 10. When I mentioned that there were a number of artists whose covers felt similar, another artist that belongs to that group is Ross Andru. What separates Andru, though, is his versatility. That, and he just does really good dinosaurs. You'll notice that a lot of his covers he does have dinosaurs or dinosaur-like creatures on them. Ross Andru is better known for his covers for Metal Men, who originally appeared in Showcase and would go on to their own title. You may not know this, but Metal Men was actually a popular title and very good seller for DC. Andru also did a lot of work for Wonder Woman, but I feel his covers for this title are just not as strong. My favorite covers of his are for Star Spangled War Stories, and he did the first one for number 90 for a series called The War That Time Forgot. Now, these may not be the best war comics from DC during this time, but they certainly are a lot of fun to read. The Dolphin issue of Showcase has become very popular with collectors, and has raised the profile of the cover artist, who is J. Scott Pike. The covers he did that are more outstanding, in my opinion, are his romance covers, but they are not that well known because, well, you just don't come across them very often, and they are generally very hard to find. If you like a challenge when it comes to collecting comic books, romance is one of the most difficult areas of comic books to collect, but they are out there, and there are a number of great covers to discover. While I'm on the topic of romance, I also want to mention Rick Estrada, who just did a handful of covers for DC, pretty much all romance, but there's one in particular that's outstanding, and that's Falling in Love number 99, one of the best romance covers to come out of DC in the 1960s, and one that has become very collectible. Jerry Grandenetti was part of a platoon of artists who did a lot of work on DC's Big Five war titles. Specifically, the covers that really stand out are what are called gray tone or wash tone covers, and go through a process that gives them an almost painted effect. This process was perfect for war covers, and there are several that he did that were memorable. Take a look at these covers he did for GI Combat. They are spectacular. These gray tone covers are very special, and DC was very good at producing them, particularly in the 1960s. To create the effect, it goes through a very special process, and I made a previous video that talks about the process you can check out at the link above or in the video description. If you like Silver Age DC comic books, you owe it to yourself to get a few nice examples of gray tone covers. And they're not exclusive to war comic books. There are examples in other genres as well. The one artist who clearly defined Superman in the first half of the 1960s is Curt Swan. He did a tremendous number of covers during this period for all the major Superman titles, as well as a lot of the interior artwork. While responsible for a lot of iconic covers in the 1960s, I think it's fair to say his covers are very solid, but nothing spectacular. Curt Swan was doing work for DC when their comic books were selling very well, and when something is selling very well, you just don't break away from what works. I feel there's one character Curt Swan got perfectly right, and that's Lois Lane. He would often do the heads of Lois Lane in other comic books she would appear in that were penciled by other artists. Curt Swan's style is what I would call classic DC artwork. There's a charm and lightness to his work, and certainly recognizable when you see it. DC was pretty consistent with the style of their work, almost to the point where you can say it's maybe too consistent. There seems to be this uniform quality with a lot of their covers for DC during the 1960s, a standard look and feel. Russ Heath predominantly did a lot of covers for DC's war titles, and there are some pretty notable ones. Heath in particular does a really good job with war covers that features planes, especially if they're bursting in flames. Like Grandenetti, his gray tone covers are superb. Where Heath separates himself from Grandenetti, though, is his work on non-war titles. He really shines in his work on Sea Devils, characters that originally first appeared in Showcase and then graduated to their own title. The gray tone or wash tone effect is perfect for this title because, as you can guess, a lot of the action takes place underwater. There are a lot of larger-than-life characters featured on these covers, which make them very impactful. I find the larger-than-life characters, when done right, just makes the cover jump. He also did a number of non-gray tone covers that are worth checking out. In particular, some dinosaur covers for Star Spangled War stories. There are a couple special mentions I wanted to include in this list. One is Sheldon Mayer, who did very specific work for DC, specifically on one title, and that's Sugar and Spike. Sugar and Spike is one of those rare DC titles that may be better known outside of North America. The title is specifically targeted for kids, but it's so well crafted that anybody of any age can really enjoy the series. In my opinion, if you look at his covers, they are just well designed, and there's an attractiveness to them that I have a hard time explaining. Specifically, as the title progresses, his covers just get better. Another artist I want to mention is Jack Adler. Whenever I talk about cover artists, it's always the penciler. This may be the only time I'll ever mention a colorist. The reason why he deserves a special mention is the innovation he brought in the coloring process. I've already mentioned gray tone or wash tone covers, and Jack Adler was pretty much the go-to colorist who did all the coloring for these covers. Gil Kane was noted for two particular characters, and that's Green Lantern and the Atom. Green Lantern was the second successful remake of a Golden Age superhero given a new origin and design, and went on to be a very successful title. Although Green Lantern would be a successful title for several years, I actually found a lot of his covers for the Atom to be more interesting. When I was working on this list, I was expecting Gil Kane to actually rank higher, partly because when I did a similar list for Marvel in the 1970s, Gil Kane came in at number 1. However, he falls into a similar category as Curt Swan. He did a lot of very good covers for DC during this decade. When compared to Swan, though, Kane had a lot more range. He did covers for a lot of westerns, and these are quite underrated. Some of the other better covers he did, in my opinion, are a few he did for Mystery in Space, featuring Adam Strange. He would progressively get better as the 1960s wore on as well. Carmine Infantino had a pretty large part in the revival of superheroes in the 1950s, which would be called the birth of the Silver Age of superheroes. The first hero to get a new makeover is the Flash. Infantino would be quite innovative in terms of what he did with the covers in the 1960s. One is being creative with the trade dress on the cover. Some of his better covers, in my opinion, are his non-superhero covers. In particular, the Strange Sports Stories covers in The Brave and the Bold, and the I Spy covers he did for Showcase. No doubt, though, Infantino is best known for his work on The Flash and on Batman. Batman was hugely popular in the later 60s with the popularity of the TV show. I also think some of his best covers were for Mystery in Space, which were inked by Murphy Anderson. Infantino would later become the art director for DC. Joe Kubert's artwork is instantly recognizable. A workhorse, Kubert did many covers for DC in the 1960s. His work with DC war titles is legendary, and he pretty much worked on all of the big five war titles at some point. His biggest contributions were for Sergeant Rock, who first appeared in Our Army at War. Some of the best comic books from DC in the 1960s can be found in their war titles. Whether it's Haunted Tank, Gunner and Sarge, or Enemy Ace, there are plenty of excellent characters and stories worth exploring here. Another notable character Kubert is known for is Hawkman. Hawkman was another Golden Age superhero revived in the Silver Age in The Brave and Bold. Kubert also did a number of superhero covers as well, but is not well known for them. One of his best covers during this time is actually for Challengers of the Unknown, specifically number 64. Absolutely superb. In my early years of collecting, I wasn't the biggest fan of Kubert's work, but I've come a long way to respect how great his body of work is. Nick Cardy has long established himself as a comic book artist on comic strips before working at DC in the 1960s. While he did some work for DC in the early 60s, it would be his later work in the 60s that would be better and more sought after. The two titles he became well known for are Aquaman and Teen Titans. Like Carmine Infantino, Nick Cardy was also great with manipulating the trade dress with his covers. While Aquaman and Teen Titans are certainly well known with comic book collectors, Cardy would say that some of his best work is on a Western title called Batlash. He was a very versatile artist and also did some great romance covers as well. Just as the 1960s were wrapping up, DC would start to revive their horror titles, and The Witching Hour would be Nick Cardy's home title where he would do a lot of great covers. DC horror titles from the late 1960s to the mid-1970s have now become very popular for collectors, a large part due to some of the outstanding covers. Neal Adams arrived in the mid-1960s, but it would be the later part of the 1960s where he would essentially take over and do many of the covers for DC comic books. Neal Adams really took covers to the next level with his attention to detail and realism, and was easily my choice as the number one cover artist for DC in the 1960s. You can really see the progression of how quickly Neal Adams' work improved. He did covers for a variety of different genres, and some of the more obscure ones have now become highly sought after by collectors. In particular, his run of covers for Tomahawk. These are very hard to find in high grade and can command a premium compared to surrounding issues. Another run of outstanding covers he did in the 1960s is his run on Deadman in Strange Adventures, the best being issue number 207, which won an award the year it was published. He did some exceptional covers for The Brave and the Bold, which featured team-ups with Batman, along with the redesigned costume of Green Arrow. These issues really stand out. A lot of his exceptional work would carry on through the 1970s for DC. Neal Adams would also essentially take over doing all the covers for Superman titles towards the end of the 1960s, including Action, Superman, and Superboy. In the 1960s, DC sales would start to decline, and decline rapidly, despite what I would say are some exceptional covers by Neal Adams. He also did some covers for Lois Lane, which to me are very underrated. He would redefine the look of Superman and Batman, two of DC's iconic characters. Towards the end of the 1960s, Neal Adams would produce some exceptional horror covers for DC as well. The two big titles would be House of Secrets and House of Mystery. These to me are some of my favorites of his, but to be honest, pretty much all of his work is consistently excellent. Without a doubt, an easy choice as the #1 cover artist for DC in the 1960s. There you go, the greatest DC comic book cover artists of the 1960s. DC published a lot of comic books in the 1960s, and no doubt I will have missed a lot of quality covers in this video. These can be difficult to track down, and there's a lot of great stuff out there for comic book collectors. Go seek out a few examples of these fine covers to add to your comic book collection. You can also check out my other videos on greatest cover artists over here. Until next time, read and enjoy your comic books.